Lieutenant Colonel Harold Knudsen, U.S. Army retired artillery officer, a native of Chicago. And Harold has really put together a very, very thought-provoking, interesting book, James Longstreet and the American Civil War, the Confederate general who fought the next war. And Harold takes a look at Longstreet's career through the prism, I'd say, of modern military art and science. And it's a very, very good book. I hope you bought it. I got a copy, read it, and look forward to the talk tonight. And with that, we'll welcome Harold to the podium.
All right, thank you very much. And up and down, this advances here, or this one here.
No, okay. I don't know why this thing does this. There you go.
All right, can everybody see the slides okay, I guess? No?
Yeah. Better.
Better? Okay. Well, even better, right? I want to thank you all for inviting me. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here and have an opportunity to talk to you about General Longstreet, someone who I think is a pretty interesting fellow. And I'm sure everybody knows that that he has been often the victim of many negative things written about him over the years. And so I'm not going to go into all of that, but I do think that after, for myself, I, of course, got the full gamut of all of that as well when I was younger. And I guess I believed most of it. You believe the written word. When I became a military officer and I started to look at some of the things that he did when we were in the training areas and even in combat myself, that I got the impression that a lot of that stuff was really political propaganda. They were trying to, it was a character assassination because of his political leanings after the war by some of his compatriots on the Confederate side, and I got the impression that he was actually onto things that were very, as I said, modern in my book. Doing things that became the method of war in the 20th century when he wouldn't have even known this. He didn't have the 20th century to learn from, but he figured some of these things out himself. So there's some of my, my background and the schoolings and whatnot that I've been to that got me, to think through this type of method of looking at them. So I just want to, caveat in the beginning, this is the lens through which I've looked at my subject from. It's very different from what other people, I think most people have said about him, anyone who's written about him, going back to the time at the end of the war. So that's how I'm coming at him. Of course, I do things also like a biographer and also an academic historian using the primary sources, the things that the other participants said as well. But anyway, that's how I looked at the subject, and that's why I came up with what I did. And so with that, tonight I can't possibly cover the entire book in an hour or so. So I'm going to just I'm going to bite off two of the main pillars, which is the modern defense, covered there at the bar, and the other one would be the modern offense. But I'll also talk some other things like his vision of the strategic situation that the South was facing, and talk a few things about Gettysburg and Vicksburg to sort of shape that in between the two main pillars that I'm going to talk about here in the beginning of the book. So with that, the Army officer coming out of West Point in the early 1800s generally got an education that inculcated that the tactical offense was generally dominant in warfare. And what I mean by that is that all things being equal, the offense typically was superior because if their officers were better and how the officers wielded their units, they were probably going to succeed over a lesser, poor-led defense. When I say all things being equal, one side not taking advantage of any trench line or works or anything like that, but they were going to be able to defeat them. And, you know, the armies, like in this painting here in 1809, had to get relatively close to each other. And that was because of the technology of the time, the weapon system of the time. This here is the British Brown Bess rifle. Many millions of these were made in late 1700s and early 1800s while they were in use. And they could be fired, loaded and fired roughly about 3 times per minute. Maybe a well-trained marksman could do it 4 times per minute, but that's about what they could do. And they could shoot fairly accurately about out to 80 yards. So that's not real far. That's why you saw in the painting, you know, the 2 sides generally would have to get pretty close, and the formations would act like a giant shotgun as they, you know, fired on each other. And so the British, for example, one of their ways of using this weapon, they might stand out about 80 yards and take a volley. They're going to take a few casualties, but you know, not as bad as if you were a lot closer. As in, for example, the statement of the time, you know, this weapon will strike the figure of a man at 80 yards, maybe at 100, but someone would be pretty unfortunate who's hit at 150. So maybe they're 80 yards out, they take the volley, and then their leadership tells them move forward. They move forward to 40 yards, they stop, and while their opponent is reloading, then they open up on them. Now they've cut the distance in half. Their accuracy is going to be much greater, and they're going to inflict many greater casualties. And then there with that 2-foot-long gleaming bayonet for shock effect, they might close with them and break the enemy formation. So that would be one way that, for example, in the late 18th century, that warfare was done. And as I say, all things being equal. But now sometimes there were situations where all things were not equal, and not everybody really was picking up on this. But for example, there were times when the tactical offense failed against a well-prepared defense. And what I mean by well-prepared defense, an officer who was confident, who resolutely led his men, had prepared a position, had plenty of ammunition, maybe did a rehearsal, whatever, and had things to hide behind, like Bunker Hill. 800 British killed at Bunker Hill. And they only took the position because they were, the colonists in the end were just about out of ammunition. Another lopsided result, New Orleans, you know, another very lopsided result. 2,000 casualties, 300 dead versus 13, you know. So a few people, you know, although going forward in school in the early 1800s, a lot of these officers still believed that the Napoleonic method, the offensive, tactical offense, direct approach, tactical offense was superior. But I think General Longstreet was one who came out of the Mexican War believing that what they'd been taught in West Point was really only a partial truth. That, as I say, the tactical defense was actually superior and could be superior. Now, he was involved in this battle. Oh, it's kind of blocked. This is the Battle of Molino El Rey. It's underneath that bar there. And there was a part of this whole town, a walled town, called Casamata. And Longstreet was in it kind of protruded. And Longstreet his men were in an attack to try and overtake that thing. And the Mexican general officer who was in charge of defending that thing was rather good. He really knew his business, and they repulsed the Americans. Lieutenant Longstreet at the time was wounded in the leg. And I believe that he took away as a lesson from these lieutenant days, his first war, that as I said, that the blanket statement, the claim that the tactical offense is superior is not true all the time. It's not the whole story. And I think he goes forward into the Civil War, when the American Civil War comes around, being appreciative of this, especially with the advancements of the firearms by the time you get into the mid-19th century. Now, I'll say a little bit about force structure and organizational structure. This is Second Manassas, where all this culminates. I don't have time to talk about the whole Peninsula situation, Manassas through the Peninsula campaign, but I will say that you know, when they started out at Manassas, both sides, but especially the Confederates, you know, as Shelby Foote said in the Ken Burns thing, most of these people, when they come into the Army, the citizen soldiers, they come from the civilian sector, and they all of a sudden become officers, and they're leading you know, regiments, and some of them have to be brigade commanders, and some of them even become generals. They don't know their jobs, to use the words that Shelby Foote said, and that's very true. And in the beginning, you know, they don't even know how to lead really a regiment very well, or a brigade, and so that's why places like Bull Run in Virginia or Wilson's Creek in Missouri, which were probably the bigger land battles right in the very beginning, you know, everything was confused and swirling together, and these men, you know, were struggling just learning and managing regiments, couldn't hardly put brigades together. Once you started with the Peninsula campaign, then they were starting to get, excuse me, a little better at putting the brigades together, and these brigade commanders knowing more about how to keep their regiments doing what they wanted to do. But then the next building block from the brigade is the division. That's the next tough piece to get to. So they're working on getting there. General Longstreet is one of the ones who seems to excel a little bit more, having no break in service and understanding a little more of what the division, you know, entails. So he does pretty well in the Peninsula, leading divisions, managing divisions, and then starting to put together, finally toward the end of the Peninsula campaign, several divisions and make that a cohesive attack, which would eventually become the corps, or sometimes the wing, but two or more divisions together, and putting those blocks all together and making that work. So he starts to get pretty good at that by the end of the Peninsula campaign. And also, you know, he starts out with working with Joe Johnston. He's the commander then. So he acts more as a co-planner with Joe Johnston and often. And then when Johnston is wounded, Robert E. Lee takes over, and he falls right into that role with Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee likes him right from the beginning and likes the ideas that he has and the knowledge and the experience that he has. So they fall in together pretty well and become pretty close right from the beginning. As I said, right at the end of the Peninsula campaign, they start, especially Longstreet, able to put together a cohesive 2-division, 3-division attack. And they finally do that toward the end there, just short of Malvern Hill. Longstreet did not, the division at the time did not participate in Malvern Hill. Lee wanted him to help him manage putting the other units together, because some of them hadn't, like Jackson's division, hadn't participated in the previous battle, so he got him in there, but helped them manage that. But that's the level that they were at. Then you have the event where Lee and Longstreet start to reorganize and try and get everything even better, working more cohesively and getting to figure out how do we divide up the Army. And Lee, I think, and Longstreet said, let's have 2 groupings, you know. And Lee wanted Longstreet, and he was trying to figure out who the other guy would be. And so the tryout period, the other guy was probably going to be Stonewall Jackson, who he thought had some kind of a fire in his belly. You know, he wasn't real good in the Peninsula campaign because he hadn't any experience in operating within the context of the Army, but he had a reputation for having done good out at in the Shenandoah Valley, you know, fighting brigade level kind of things and running all over the place, confusing his opponent. So after, you know, his tryout was kind of the Cedar Creek thing.
After, you know, his tryout was kind of the Cedar Creek thing, and Robert E. Lee thought, well, Stonewall Jackson did well there, so it's going to be, the other guy's going to be Stonewall Jackson. So that culminates in the force structure that they come up with the 2 wings. Jackson had been sent forward to get in behind Pope and undo his line and force him back. And then, of course, Pope turns around, comes after him, and he's going to start receiving reinforcements from McClellan, who come up from the peninsula, starts landing in Alexandria and Washington, D.C., and some of his elements get out here quick and start falling in with Pope. So they're going to attack Jackson, and then Longstreet, who has still the preponderance of the Army, he shows up with Lee,
And Longstreet now is managing the whole wing, and instead of being a division commander, now he's a corps commander. Both these guys are Jackson and Longstreet, and he puts 5 of them together. This is the biggest attack on the North American continent, I think, at that point in the history of the North American continent, which works pretty darn well. So that's that's the thing that's one of the themes that the very beginning of my book kind of gets into, which is force structure, organizational structure, which is also something I worked in the Army. My basic branch is field artillery, but later you have to go into what we call a functional area, which is organizational structure. It can be either personnel and organization or equipping or both. So anyway, to me, looking at this to me is a victory not only of tactics and battlefield conduct and battlefield leadership, but it's a victory of improved organizational structure. And what you get out of improved organizational structure, you get improved command and control. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say to bring you up to that point in there. So after Second Manassas, Lee wants to move with all alacrity up into Maryland, for a number of reasons. Some of them are political. Maybe they get Marylanders who are still, the secessionist side to try again for another secession convention and try and come back out of the Union and join the rest of the Confederacy. The other one is another political one is to try and see if the British will recognize the independence of the Confederate States. If there's a good result that comes out of this movement into Maryland, that's one. Now, Lord Palmerston, the Prime Minister of Britain, did not like the United States. I guess for I don't know all of his reasons, but he thought the United States was kind of a bully, and he was more sympathetic to the Confederate States, and also thought that if the Confederates were successful and they would become a viable nation, that they would be a great trading partner, because the Confederates the Southerners were very, going back to the founding period, the Democrats and also the early Republicans, the Jeffersonian Republicans, James Madison, and they were against tariffs for the most part. A lot of them were. And so they thought they could be a zero tariff trading partner between the two and not have to deal with the North, which were the Federalists, who then become the Republicans in 1854 are more for tariffs. So that's one of the things. So those were the two political aspects. And then, of course, Lee needed to provision the Army with food because they'd already kind of denuded northern Virginia of food. So going up into Maryland was going to help them there. So anyway, getting off the track a little bit. But when they this is just an overall large snapshot of Antietam. The left side starts with Stonewall Jackson. He gets attacked first. And he battles with his opponent in the cornfield and is able to stabilize the line. And then McClellan starts on this wing, which is going to ultimately come under Longstreet. And now let me get to the close up here of this is the map from my book. That you'll see on the Antietam piece. But the thing here that I want to impress upon you as he's learning. This battle here is going to reinforce for him the strength of the tactical defense when it's done right, and then he's going to try and improve upon it after this. What you have here is the sunken road. You've also seen pictures of the sunken road, and this is where many of his men fall in to defend from. And the good thing about the sunken road is he's got this piece here is this piece. And of course, you have still sunken. This is also sunken for most of the way here for Rhodes Division. But the troops that go into here, which in the beginning, when they first contact with the Union attack of 9,000, are only at 2,200, and they hold them off pretty well when they come into that square there, that rectangle there, which is essentially we call today a kill zone. And because they have the advantage of being lower than their opponent, coming at them in direct approach across his plane, being lower, they're only presenting their body from, say, the knees on up.
being lower, their volleys are more controlled. So in the early part of the war, sometimes volleys would fly over the opponent. So they're more likely that they're going to get their opponent as they're coming at them. So that's why the Union casualties are so heavy here. And the only way, they finally started to think, well, we got to get on the flank. They started to get on the flank over here and then enfilade this. That's when the Union was able to wrest the sunken road from Longstreet's command, push them back. Of course, you know the story that Longstreet and his staff, find Miller's battery, all the crew shot up, and he holds the horses while the guns, and they put the great shot in and stop the Union attack. And by the end of the day, they don't take back the sunken road, but they push them back a little bit, and then that's going to stabilize the front. The final part of the battle is as Burnside gets across the bridge there. Burnside was now called Burnside's Bridge. Then Longstreet and Lee standing there with him and think, well, we're finished. They're going to get on our flank. We don't have anybody else. But then at the last minute, Adrian Hill shows up and saves the day, like Marshal Blucher at Waterloo. But anyway, Longstreet takes away from this the result, the casualties that they inflicted on the Union as they came into the kill zone. And that's going to be what he's going to work on here next, which is going to be, I think, the real masterpiece of defensive work in 1862 on a large scale, on a force scale, or a wing scale. What he does here to the Union Army. So he and Lee are out at Culpeper Courthouse. They find out that Burnside has now McClellan's been let go, and Burnside is going to become the Army commander. And they are pretty sure that, of course, he's going to try and drive on Richmond again. Unlike what McClellan did starting way out on the peninsula, Burnside's going to try and come across the Rappahannock closer to Richmond, which is going to be here at Fredericksburg. So Lee says to Longstreet, take your troops up there and set up blocking positions, appropriate blocking positions. So that's what, and I'll go up west. I'll get Stonewall Jackson's command and bring him in, and we'll be there get there as fast as we can. So Longstreet's going to have about 10 to 12 days by himself before Lee can get Jackson. But when he gets out here, he has this vision that he knows what he's going to do here. He sees this great plain, nice and flat, between the town and the base of the Maurice Heights, what he's going to use this for. Everything over there, there's really no place to maneuver, and there's no place to maneuver over here. So if you can channel him, they can come in this way. He thinks he's got it. He's also found another sunken road at the base of Mary's Heights, and this one's even better than the one at Antietam because it's got these nice 90-degree angles that his men can lean up against. It's not the stone wall is not across the whole way. It's not as perfect as this, but this is probably the best spot. And they can lean up against the rest their elbows on the stones or on the grass there. And all they're presenting, instead of Antietam, when they're in the sunken road and they're presenting maybe this much of their body, now they're only showing, this much of the body. And again, they're still lower. They're going to have more controlled volleys. You're going to have a much better shot when your elbows are leaning on something and you're lining on something than when you're doing this with a heavy rifle. And then they're also going to incorporate artillery on a scale that he'd not done before. So the plan is he's not going to put a real strong defense right through the town and defend the town right up to the water's edge. It's kind of a ruse. He wants them to come across. I mean, he's going to bait them in. He's going to have some sharpshooters over there, some people, but a minimal amount. Here's a painting what it must look like when the Union was trying to put the pontoons across and they're getting shot at. Of course, they're going to shoot some of the Union soldiers, but the key is they want them to come across. They want them to think that they're making progress. They want them to force them through the town. like they do here, and a little street fighting, and then let them come across and set up their army on the other side, and then come at them into that spot, that flat plain right here between the town and Marie's Heights. We've got everything set up. Now this is going to be this is 1 p.m. Now, there was already an attempt by the Union to try, Stonewall Jackson and Lee show up about the day before battle. Lee puts him off to the right, he's off the map here, but actually Burnside starts in on him. So Stonewall Jackson only has a little time to prepare, and his men dig, but there, the result is something on the order of what Longstreet had at Antietam, a shallow trench. And again, his men are showing, about 2/3 of the body, as opposed to Longstreet's men only showing the top of the shoulders. There is a penetration the Union makes of Jackson's line, and Jackson is able to marshal troops and push that out again. That was Major General Meade at the time. He was division commander. They push him out, and he stabilizes his line. And so then 1 o'clock, Burnside starts in on Longstreet and comes right in, just like he thought, right across the open area, which we call a kill zone today. And we all know what happens. They try over 13 major assaults. That's up until 3 p.m. Burnside decides to call this off about 3:45, and it said no Union soldier apparently gets within 100 feet of the wall. The dotted line here is that this is where most of the Union soldiers apparently were felled, according to this map maker. There's no maneuver, hardly any place to maneuver. They have to stay within here. So that's why this, to me, as a modern soldier, I see this as a perfect, doctrinally correct kill zone. What is a kill zone? Kill zone is a place, what I learned even in basic training as a private and before I became an officer, was you try to find, if you can, hilly ground. You want to make it somewhat concave the way you array your troops so that they have interlocking fields of fire. And the interlocking fields of fire result in there being no places to hide and take cover out there for the enemy. So you got everything covered with direct fire. Then you're going to incorporate indirect fire, which is your field artillery. And in modern times, you're going to use other things too. Combat engineers are going to put nasty things out there. You've got, close air support's going to pour in there, and so on and so forth. But this time he's working with infantry and field artillery. So that's what he does, and it works great. It's a quote from Lee. You've all heard, war is so terrible, and we get to like it. Even Lee thinks that this is horrible, watching these guys get cut down like this. So what does he do here beyond just simply getting the amount of troops behind the wall? He does what we do today, in a doctrinally correct kill zone. Clearly delineated lanes of fire. When you're a private, you're trained in basic training. You and another guy that are going to share a foxhole. Your sergeant's going to come by and put a stake on each side, and he's going to tell you, this is your lane. You only shoot at targets in front of you. That's it. You see a target over there, that's not yours. That's somebody else's responsibility down the line. Don't go for it, because that's breaking the discipline. You might be letting something through right in front of you. So clearly delineated lanes of fire. And here's the real innovative thing, which I think is one of the first big things that shows us that Longstreet is really an innovator. Here he has a line of fires right up on the line. Remember, I told you from that earlier slide that the musket of the time period, you could load it probably 3 times per minute and fire it. A good rifle marksman, maybe 4. But here, he's got just guys shooting the weapons, and then 2 guys behind each firer. They don't fire their weapons. They just load the empty that the shooter hands back And one of those two guys ought to have another one loaded. He hands it forward. So instead of 3 rounds per minute, now you're up to 8, 9, 10, 11 rounds per minute, each shooter around the wall, on the stone wall. So it's this tremendous volume of fire that he's throwing out here. So Longstreet increased the rate of fire there with the, with the direct fire with the infantry. Okay, now field artillery. What does he do with that? This is here's a picture of a typical battery. Usually a battery would be 6 guns in this time period. So there'd be 3 off to the left or to the right. Now this gun here is really basically a direct fire weapon system. You could shoot about a mile, and these guys could probably see what they were shooting at until the smoke might have accumulated and obscured what they were looking at. So it would be on this graph, modern weapons, it would be, say, about here, about a mile from gun to target. So from gun to target, it had a very, very small arc. Gun might fire, maybe the tube is this high off the ground, it would shoot, maybe at its max arc, shooting out to max range, the round, the shell or the ball might come up as high as a man's head, but then it's going to gradually come back down again, to the earth or hit a target before that, a tree or a bunch of guys or whatever. Later in the war, you have some rifle cannon that can shoot further than that, 2 miles, maybe a little more. A lot of these, they're too big, too heavy to put on wheels. They have their own carriage. So a lot of these are used for, coastal artillery. A lot of the Rodman guns on the Union side were this kind of thing. Coastal guns that sit in a square carriage, very heavy. They're stationary. But after the war, in the 1880s, they developed the ability to, instead of loading the gun from the muzzle, which is the front, they figured out that you can load the gun. They could improve the breech with the spring system so that it could withstand, you open up the back and put the round in and the powder bag, close it, and it could expand the power of these expanding gases and hurl these rounds, these shells, to distances out beyond the horizon. So with that happened, now you have to have a calculation system where we have to have, people using mathematics and geometry and ballistics and all of that and do precise calculations when, from the battery position to calculate all this so that you could get an accurate, predicted location of where it's going to land. That's what modern artillery does. This was my gun in Desert Storm. This was the M109 self-propelled pellets. It could shoot with a rocket-assisted projectile in my day, roughly 15 miles. You can see that the round going in the air a little over 4 miles before it comes down. The 8-inch gun, this one came into the inventory in the 1950s and was then replaced after Desert Storm with the MLRS multiple launch system to shoot 20 miles very accurately. You see the round going in the air 7 miles before it would come down. So what does that, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because artillery would in the future become would become a system that you could spread out and tie in all the units once the communication was available, whether it was wire communication and during the First World War or radio, or in our day, digital communications that can be transmitted between, a computer, a hardened laptop that sits in one of these tracks where these fire direction soldiers figure out the firing data. So you can mass artillery from all over the place and keep it hidden behind the maneuver and hit your enemy that way. And that's how, we could reach out and really hit someone. But in the 18th century, the 19th century, you couldn't do that. It was all direct fire. So let's say this Mary's Heights, here are 3 Confederate batteries. There's the Union coming out. Let's say there's a Confederate unit here. These guys would work directly for the infantry unit. That colonel, they wouldn't generally shoot over here. It's their own battery. so that's typical of how it worked in the Civil War. But at Fredericksburg, General Longstreet takes away the field artillery batteries from supporting the maneuver brigades. Says, I'm going to control them all. Although Porter Alexander, my artillery coordinator, is actually the guy I'm going to assign this mission to, and he's the one who's going to control all these two and make them pile in and hit all of the and service the targets here in the kill zone if the Yankees come at us. And the first 3 assaults, matter of fact, they're broken up by the artillery before they even get close enough to be in range of the Confederate infantrymen. So I just thought this was pretty good what he did in 1862. This is not something he read in some field manual. They didn't have field manuals then. What we call today centralized field artillery reinforcing fires. But he thinks this up and he's really innovative with it.
What sort of pieces were you talking there? From the
these pieces would shoot roughly about a mile. The field artillery pieces. Oh, I forgot something. The dotted lines. When Robert Lee showed up the day before, or the day and a half before, he sets up his headquarters in a place today, off the chart here, but on a place today at the battlefield park called Lee's Hill. Now, General Longstreet had called down, while he was alone still before Lee showed up, he calls down to Tredegar Iron Works in Richmond and says, can you send up some heavier ordnance pieces? Like I was telling you, the heavier ones that don't have wheels, that they got to be brought up by a wagon and set there. And he got a couple of them up there, the heavy ordnance that would be on the coast. And they set them up on Lee's Hill. And there's still 2 pieces up there. They're pretty rusty. But those shoot over 2 miles. But this is really modern. It shoots over the field artillery. These guns shooting over the field artillery, over the infantry, to pile in on the targets into the kill zone. So that would be over about 2 miles, 2.3 miles gun to target for these guns, to answer your question. This is a great quote that he says there. This is the situation, 65,000 Confederates massed around Fredericksburg, and I think it's trying to memorize it. We had about 10, 12 days in which to prepare for the approaching battle. So, as I said earlier, the tactical defense, I think Longstreet realizes, is really actually dominant as opposed to the tactical direct approach offense when you have the right circumstances. You spend the time, you do the preparation, you rehearse, you do all those things. It's going to make all the difference. So, to recap, here's from the other end, from the Union angle, I suppose. If they had a drone taking a picture of it, there's the town, there's Maurice Heights off in the distance. So the steps that we use today to teach us about what is the proper defense, what are the steps of the defense, visualize how the enemy is going to approach, how you think he's going to fight, come through the town, where, how to kill him, i.e. where you're going to put the kill zone, where you're going to position your direct fire, your infantry units, and then also incorporate the indirect fire. And that's how, same thing that we do. Did it great, perfect. So after New Year into January of 1863, I think General Longstreet now has this idea in his head that we've got a way, I think we can defeat the North, in the sense that we can create these maybe these mass casualties events using tactical defense if we have an opportunity. But we got to do something. How do we incorporate that, into something that we would call today a national military strategy? The South doesn't have a national military strategy, but the North does. When it starts, Winfield Scott is still on. General Winfield Scott is still on active duty, and he advises the Lincoln administration that we should have what I consider a 3-part plan, the Anaconda Plan. First, we're going to have a naval blockade out in the Atlantic Ocean and in the Gulf of Mexico to hinder trade, commerce with Europe, and cut down on whatever supplies they can get from over there. That's one part. We're going to divide the South along the Mississippi River. We had Grant working on that. He was doing a good job with that up through into 1862 and into 1863 as he's starting to get closer to Vicksburg. And then the last part of that is we're going to, use our larger, more numerous armies and attack in concert, on the south against the major places and other places where they can't cover, because we outnumber them. They can't possibly match us man for man, so we should have an advantage. But that third part, they're not really doing. The Union isn't really pulling together very well in 1862 and even 1863. And that doesn't really happen, I don't think, until Grant comes in. Here's that quote that, as he comes in April of 64, so far as practical, they're to move together, and come down in one effort as he would do once he takes over and pushes Meade to stay after Lee. And Sherman, his protege, knows exactly what to do out in the Western Theater. But so Longstreet looks at this and he says, well, the only way we're going to get out from under this is we got to have our own kind of national strategy, national military strategy that is the opposite of this to mitigate this. And he thinks it should be a strategic defense with operational level offenses, to go after certain, whatever Union targets come in to try and defeat the, one of the Confederate armies. Now he looks at the Confederacy and says, what is our defensible, realistically? What is realistically our defensible perimeter? What are the perimeter armies we have? We have the one in Virginia. We have the one under Bragg. Those are two about the same size. And then, all of these troops, Beauregard's covering out here, and Johnson's got in Pemberton, the 23,000 over here. This is the other piece that we've got to incorporate into this. So from the Mississippi River across Tennessee into Virginia, this is really the defensible perimeter. And then we use the rail system. Now the different colors mean different gauges, which is problematic, but we'll use the rail system to deploy troops back and forth as necessary to create these windows of American superiority against a select Union target, try to hit them, defeat them, and realign again and wait for the next thing. And Longstreet thinks we should, if we can do this and be successful militarily and make it so painful for the Lincoln administration to continue to prosecute the war, that maybe the war weariness will end his presidency in November 1864. So he's thinking, run the clock out on the Union run the clock out on the Lincoln administration to November of 1864, and maybe he'll lose, and maybe a peace Democrat will come in and suspend the war, and they're out from under it. So that's kind of what he's thinking of now as we're going into early 1863. Now, so the problem is also for them, they're doing okay in the East, but they're not doing too well in the West. And Grant's working his way toward Vicksburg. There are two ideas in early 1863: reinforce Bragg and reinforce Mississippi, reinforce Johnson in Mississippi. They're kind of leaning toward Mississippi, but then Chancellorsville happens, and they lose Stonewall Jackson. Lee's going to have to reorganize the army. Goes from 2 wings to 3 corps. Longstreet has the 1st corps. He's going to promote A.P. Hill and Dick Ewell from Major General to 3-star Lieutenant General. They're going to have the 2nd Corps and the 3rd Corps. So Lee does not want to do this Western concentration thing that Longstreet is proposing. And some say he's parochial to Virginia, maybe so, but he doesn't want to give up, no commander wants to give up their assets to go somewhere else. Lee also doesn't have a lot of confidence in the Western leaders, which, is kind of unfortunate. But anyway, he works on the Davis administration to try and convince them that we should let's go into Pennsylvania, with the idea that if they go into Pennsylvania, then maybe that'll cause the panic enough that the administration will tell Grant to cease and desist and move troops over to the Eastern Theater and help chase Lee out of Pennsylvania. That was one of Lee's ideas. Well, of course, that doesn't pan out. That's what he was thinking early. And so, but he, Lee, by virtue of the prestige of his position, he's able to convince the administration that that's what they're going to do. So there is going to be an invasion of Pennsylvania. So Longstreet isn't so keen on this, but he says, all right, if we're going to do this, how about we do, we move up there, but we try, harness the defensive tactics that we have so well proven that we're good at now. We can really hurt them that way. And he says this, you see this in his memoir. My corps, steady as a rock. It was not to be broken by direct assault. I'm steady enough to work and wait for its chosen battle. So he's trying to tell Lee, all right, we're going to do this. Let's go set up a battle somewhere. I'll take the assault. You use the other two corps to protect my flanks, and we'll hurt them again. See, hopefully we'll get a good result out of that. So that's what I think Longstreet believes that he's convinced Lee of, or that Lee's agreed to. But there's not really any thing in the records that proves that Lee really agreed to that. And what probably happened is he had a bunch of conversations, and Longstreet continued to work on Lee to try and get him to go with this, but maybe Lee was like, well, I have to say in general, I don't know, nodding his head. So maybe Longstreet took that as tacit acceptance of his idea, but I don't think that really happened. But here, the first bullet that I have here, Lee tells us that Longstreet tells us that Lee did agree to attack the defense if attacked, and he says this in a book that was written by a guy named Swinton in 1866, who wrote the first book about the Army of the Potomac, and helped the writer Mr. Swinton with it. And he says this in there. So that's what I guess Longstreet was convinced Lee agreed to. So, but they're going to Pennsylvania, and the real problem is, in my opinion, as a professional planner, soldier, is the second bullet there. Lee never defined a real campaign objective. It's, they were going to, the best you can find is that Lee said, we're going to go across Maryland, we're going to go through Maryland, we're going to get into Pennsylvania, and then we're going to turn on a big arc, and we're going to head toward the Susquehanna River. Maybe we'll go in the direction of Philadelphia, maybe we'll go in the direction of Baltimore, but that's vague. That's not an objective that you can give in an order to your subordinates, to your corps commanders, to your cavalry, any of that. So it causes, it causes some problems. It causes, I think, a certain amount of, time wasted on getting forage. And I don't think, they did need to get food. There's no doubt about that, just like they did during 1862 when they went to Antietam. They did need to gather food, but they used nearly all of June to forage. And then Ewell gets to the outskirts of Harrisburg, and he gets up in here around the end of June, around 26th or so. He's got some guys looking at it. He sends a note and he says, there's not a lot over there except for militia, and the bridge is still there. There's some of there are other bridges that can burn, but that one is still intact. And so Lee then decides, okay, you know what? Let's make Harrisburg the objective. And then he sends out on the evening of the 27th or the 28th, I forget off the top of my head, but I think it's the 27th, that they're going to make that the objective, which is good because Harrisburg is the most northern state capital. And if you're up there to cause problems for the Lincoln administration, what could be more embarrassing than walking into Harrisburg, even for this 24 hours? It's not like walking into one of these little towns. That's no big deal. That's not going to get the Lincoln administration to quit. But that's going to be embarrassing. You're going to score some political benefit if you do something like that. So that's why I think that is a good objective. But unfortunately, he reverses himself the next day. Longstreet's spy or scout, whatever you want to call him, Mr. Henry Harrison, who he's paid to go run around and try to find the Union Army, he finds two Union Corps at Frederick, Maryland. So Lee thinks, they're catching up to me. So he reverses himself, and we're not going to go for Harrisburg, and he orders a concentration at the Cashtown, Gettysburg area. Of course, that ends up in the battle and he doesn't win. He thinks that this is going to nudge me to the east. Now they've heard the east taken over. But let me tell you about these maps here real quick. This is a hypothetical. This is my life in the Fulda Gap, how we were going to defend against the Soviet Union, the Red Warsaw Pact when they attacked us in the 1980s. I was in 5th Corps, which was at Gettysburg too. I was in Germany then. We were 2 divisions. This was my division, 8D. And we were going to harness a number of kill zones in these places. There's 2 of them. One is Fulda. This is the Fulda Gap. Hunfeld, it's another one. And, we were massively outnumbered by the Soviet army. We knew that. And their main attack, we were sure, was going to come down the Autobahn to Gießen and then cut south to Frankfurt. And we were going to also have to contend with all these supporting attacks by an entire Soviet Guards army. But we believe that our equipment was better, our training was better, our NCO Corps was better, our operational and tactical acumen was better. And so we believe that we would actually be able to perhaps chop some of these up and trip these pretty badly in these bowls, in these kill zones. And then once we were done with that, we could fall on the flank of the main Soviet thrust like I have depicted here. Well, that's exactly what the type of thing you could do if you are leading and you use this as an objective. There are lots of spots around here where you have nice high ground where you can set up a tactical defense and really, make it miserable for them. Here's one called Fairview Park today, high ground. Let's say you put 3 corps here and you could receive attack there. That would be a lot better than what the heck happened at Gettysburg. This is the kind of thing that Longstreet was looking at. And I write about this in the book because, this is important. People think that they only think of Gettysburg in terms of the tactical, the tactical things of the battle and what could have this guy done differently and that guy done differently. It was already lost before they started because of this. There was no operational campaign objective. And, unfortunately, that's Lee's fault. He didn't know, the commander has to determine the essential tasks for his subordinates. And then you have to link the overall objective to what it is you want your subordinates to do. So that doesn't happen here, Dick Ewell, he's the first one forward, but he spends at least a week, 10 days just out gathering cows and wagons and all kinds of food and everything. Longstreet writes in his memoir around the 27th or 26th or 27th of June, Dick Ewell passes to me 3,500 head of cattle. I mean, that took a while for them to go out and get all those. They weren't all in one place, 5,000 barrels of flour that he went and got, So that means he's got his whole army, his whole corps divided up, going out to all the farms and little hamlets and towns and collecting all this stuff up. It probably takes a couple of days to put together 5,000 barrels of flour, in wagons and then run them down to Longstreet. So, as Montby said, any order that can be misunderstood will be misunderstood. That's the importance of, you've got to have the objective. I think they got off track in what they were doing here. Okay, so let me say a few things about Gettysburg and move on to the next major pillar. So, y'all know what happened on the first day. Buford's cavalry, Ewell's coming down. He's joined with elements from AP Hill. They run into the elements to Union Corps north of town. They push them through Gettysburg, and then they go to ground here on Holt's Hill and Cemetery Hill. And then, there's controversy. Ewell should have attacked and cleared them off there. Well, there were Confederate elements tried in the evening, and they were repulsed. That's not well known. But, Hancock, on the Union side, Meade sends Hancock here as fast as he can. He's told that he's going to be in charge of whoever's here. He tells Howard and the other element, Union soldiers, this is a good spot. And I think this would be a good defensive position anchored to the round top. So it's Hancock who makes the decision that they're going to fight here. Meade shows up a couple hours later in the evening and he sees what Hancock's decided. And he says, oh, this is good. Thank you, General Hancock. We're definitely going to sit here and fight. So what happens on the morning of the 2nd is Lee, he's not sure what he's going to do yet. You know, but the night before, he said, you know, he's in Saddle and Longstreet's there with him, and you know, Longstreet's trying to convince him, well, let's just leave him alone. Let's try and swing around the army and get between them and the DC area down into this area. That's isn't that what we're trying to do? And Lee says, Longstreet says Lee was emotional at this point, raises his fist at the Union Army, and he says, if they're here tomorrow, I'm going to fight them here tomorrow. And Longstreet's thinking, we don't want to do this. He's got all the advantages, but you know, that's what Lee wants to do at this point. So the next morning, Lee is up, and he look at this side first, and he sees the Union Army is filled in about halfway down to the Round Tops, and he sees, okay, this is the Union flank. So their flank is open. I think they're vulnerable here. But then he gets on, you know, he's on Traveler, and he goes around to the other side to go visit with Dick Ewell to see what he thinks. If there's opportunity over there. Dick Ewell says, no, there isn't. They probed the night before, and they were repulsed on Culp's Hill. So then Lee comes back around, and he tells Longstreet, you're going to be the main attack, and you're going to attack on this side, up the Emmitsburg Road. That's the first idea, and then turn in and take the flank over here. Now, Longstreet's units are still over here, so they got to come all the way down here to this assembly area. And by the time they get down here, well, Meade's already filled everything in down to the, I don't have that depicted here, but he's already filled everything in and anchored it to the Round Top. So Lee is working on irrelevant intel from whatever, 6:30 in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, when he thinks this is the flank. It's not the flank. The flank's over here somewhere. But he's still going with it. They start moving. They're going to start the attack. And then, you know, of course, McLaws sees the Union can see him from the Round Tops. He's stopped, you know, and Longstreet brings Longstreet up, and they say, yeah, we got to turn around. And Lee's right there. He's watching this. Longstreet then tells him that's the whole countermarch thing. And that results in the alternate plan. This is the alternate. McLaws is going to go into the wheat field and the peach orchard. Hood is going to attack the Round Top, you know, and the Devil's Den and all the boulders and all that stuff. Bad plan. You know, and so Hood knows this is a bad plan. Hood had sent some reconnaissance around the big Round Top where there was nobody. And they got, you know, they found the Union wagon trains were back in here, vulnerable. And he realized, we can run roughshod over them, and then we can get into the rear of the Union position. This is a lot better. Because, yeah, we're going to run into Union forces, but it's not going to be butting our head against stout defense. Guys hiding behind boulders is half the size of a house, you know, with all that advantage. Well, he tells that to Longstreet. Longstreet likes the idea, and Longstreet brings that to General Lee's attention. Lee doesn't want to do it. He's stuck on his idea. No, this is where we're going to go. So, well, you all know what happens. That doesn't work. They're taking an awful lot of casualties, you know, reducing sickles in the wheat field and the peach orchard. It's not going to go any further because by the time that fight's over, Meade's reinforced everything behind sickles by moving more of Hancock down. Hancock's kind of the fire brigade for the whole defense. He's pushing out everything the Confederates do that day, thinking on his feet. And of course, Hood takes horrendous casualties pushing in. They take the Devil's Den, but at great cost. So at the end of the day, it's you know, nothing worthwhile taking, and they've lost soldiers they can't afford to lose. Now, a lot of historians, I talk about this in the book because there are historians who criticize Hood for this idea. It wouldn't work. That you'd come up here and you'd get squashed because Meade would marshal troops and come after you. Well, it is true that Meade would have to react, and he would have to send people from elsewhere. But this is a lot better than going against a prepared defense. It's one of the things you want to do in a situation. You want to put, we say, you want to put the enemy on the horns of a tactical dilemma. Where you show up where they don't expect you. Now it's a tactical dilemma. What do they got to do? Well, they got to do something about it. They got to pull troops from somewhere to react against you, and that's going to open vulnerable elsewhere. Now, this I think is interesting, and I do comparatives in the book, so I'm going to show you one here. the Union position, as they say, is like a fish hook like this, right? Here's a similar one. This is the Gazala line in North Africa, reverse fish hook. This one, the base is anchored to the Mediterranean Sea. General Field Marshal Gritchy holding the Gazala line. He's got to defend Tobruk. Field Marshal Rommel is trying to figure out, how do I undo this? Well, he's got the as lead. I can do two things. I can either find a place to penetrate this thing, which was very strong, very stout, or I can go around it like this. That's exactly what he does. He takes his 3 German panzer divisions. He has 1 Italian division cover his flank so that they don't know about this, and he gets around into the rear. And he puts the enemy on the horns of a tactical dilemma. Now they got to deal with this. So they got to pull, Ritchie's got to pull all kinds of people to go after these tank divisions that are, wreaking havoc in his rear area. And that makes this weak. And then eventually the Italians break through and it collapses the whole thing, and he wins. He wins this campaign and eventually takes Tobruk. So anyway, that's my dig at some of the authors who think that Hood was wrong to think that. I think Hood was right to think that, and I think Longstreet was right to support him in that. So I'm not going to, everyone knows what happens at Pitten's Charge, but I do want to tell you, as a professional artilleryman, I have something that I think would have been done better if, I don't know, if they could do it over again. The problem with, and I have an appendix in the book that that's about the causes of why the Confederate Fire Support Plan failed at Gettysburg. And the problem is this. Well, there are a lot of problems, but as far as the setup of the guns, the problem is this: is that, as I told you earlier, that they didn't have in the Civil War, this time period, the ability to come in, to calculate accurate predicted fire for cannon artillery. It was a direct. As a direct sight weapon. You aimed it like a big rifle. You had a stick behind it. You could move it left and right. You had a big screw behind the back of the tube to raise it or lower the tube. So it was, line of sight kind of thing. It was an estimation kind of thing. So, it was never going to be perfectly accurate each and every shot. And every time you fire it, the gun displaces, they roll it back, but it's inaccurate. So when you have these guns, most of the Confederate artillery, of course, is directly opposite the Union line, 90-degree angles, 80 degrees, 70, So it's hard for them to get the rounds to land exactly where they want. And Lee wants to penetrate the line at this copse of trees, over here. So I don't have it on here, but over here somewhere. So, from all of the reading and even the movie Gettysburg, what happened was most of this just flies right over the Union infantry into the rear areas. It hits some of the artillery or some of the wagon trains, but it really does no damage at all to the infantry line. And then when the Confederate infantry comes across, it gets pounded by artillery and then, of course, the muskets. But in an age when you cannot calculate accurate predicted artillery fire, when you don't have any mathematical or geometric ways of doing that, the only thing you can do then is you enfilade your enemy. So if they had put most of their artillery, instead of putting it directly opposite at a 90-degree angle, put most of it over here next to the town and try and get a 0 degree. These batteries, this gun's here, these batteries would be zero angle, be zero with the Union line. So if they're short, medium, or long, at least you have a chance of hitting somebody and weakening this line. Even these guys, -10, 5 degrees, 40 degrees, better than this. And then you could fit some down here behind this other two. So I think if they had done something like this, they might have had maybe a better chance. But does that mean they would have, broken the Union line and won the battle? I can't say that. But I can tell you that this didn't work. This might have been a better option. So. Okay, a couple things about the next situation. They're defeated at Gettysburg on day 3 with the repulse of Pickett's charge. And then, of course, you got the situation going on in the Western Theater. They're going to lose Vicksburg on July the 4th, the next day. He's going to surrender to Grant. But this is what this is just to give you an idea of what General Longstreet was trying to, what this might look like if they had done a Western concentration. Now, Grant had tried to take Vicksburg from the north twice, and he was beat back and repulsed. And this is a situation that they had here. Pemberton had this well defended all the way around with 23,000 men. There were about 5,000 more Confederates north of the state, and Johnston with 8,000 on the other side of the state. He's really the overall commander. He's superior to Pemberton. But what happens is Grant, on his third try, he floats past the batteries of Vicksburg, comes down, down to this area, digs some canals as well, and he lands down here to the south. When he initially lands, he's only got 20,000 men, plenty to shove aside a simple brigade of Confederates who have to run back this way toward Jackson. Now, Pemberton looks at this and he says, well, I got him. He's just going to try the same old thing he did, and I got defenses on the south here just as well as I did on the north. So I'll handle him again just fine. But that's not what Grant does. Grant confuses the enemy, and this is a really nice piece of operational art that he does here. He confuses the enemy by moving across the state to the northeast toward Jackson. And they don't move. The Confederates don't mass and go after him when they still have a chance of at least numerical parity. These numbers, what's there is 36,000. Grant's got 20K here. When he gets over here, another couple, gets more reinforcements across the river, he's up to 35K. But he's got to stop here for a while because Sherman's trying to come up. So he doesn't have all his force structure. So, between here, or even here, this is the time to come together, use this rail line. You can move laterally across the strait faster than he can walk and come after him, get after him. Now imagine if, say, what Longstreet was proposing, reinforcement from Virginia, say 20,000, shows up in the theater. Now the Confederates got a lot. Catch them here or even down here. Now you got them about 2-1. Now you got a better chance of winning. So that's what Longstreet was proposing to do. Well, that doesn't happen, and they lose Mississippi. So all that's left now, the other viable army is Bragg, and now Robert E. Lee realizes, well, we should have done that. I should have gone with what Longstreet said, but I made that mistake. We didn't do that. And now here, Bragg's been shoved down from Tennessee into northern Georgia. His army is called the Army of Tennessee, and now he's in Georgia. So that doesn't sound so good anymore, does it? I guess he's got to change the name. But Rosecrans does a really good job with his Tullahoma campaign, which gets very little notice because there aren't any major battles that cost thousands of lives. I think the whole Tullahoma campaign, where he essentially crowbars Braxton Bragg out of Tennessee into northern Georgia, only cost him about 500 casualties in all the skirmishes. So he's pushed Bragg down here. He's taken Chattanooga. He's shoved Bragg's down here. Bragg's starting to get reinforcements though from along the coast. He's got, this time Lee agrees Longstreet's plan was right. We've got to reinforce the West. So now 2 divisions under Longstreet are coming out here as fast as they can. But now Rosecrans has made a mistake. He's got his corps way too spread out. So one of them is attacked. The other 2 are too far away to assist them. So if Bragg can jump one of them, he can overwhelm them. He recognizes this, and he's going to go after the middle one under Thomas. And then Thomas has made a mistake. He's got one of his divisions too far away from the other one, so that could get gobbled up too. I mean, if Bragg could move fast enough. So that's what he's going to do. So Bragg, here's this older map. It's kind of hard to see. But there's Chattanooga. Here's the Confederate Army under Bragg. Here are the Union elements trying to come together. Missionary Ridge. So Bragg wants to, fold. He wants to try and get the flank and fold the Union Army and shove it down into this area that I have in an oval here on the south side of Missionary Ridge. So it's called Lemore's Cove. And that would separate them from their new supply base and put them in some very tough terrain that would be really hard to exercise command and control. If he can do that, then he's, you know, he might be able to break this army up. It would probably disintegrate, have to infiltrate across the state line and go up to Bridgeport, Stevenson in Alabama. That'd be the closest rail line where they could get any kind of support. So this is what happens on the 19th of September. There was first contact on the 18th of September out of Chickamauga. There was cavalry action, but he's going to start, you know, on the right. And this is Polk is the main effort. He's the right wing. And then the left wing has no three-star general. It's all pieces, different units from the Confederacy. He's got his 3 brigades that came forward from Virginia there that are on the hood right now, you know, Buckner and Hill and some elements from further south. So the left wing really has no conductor, no lieutenant general running the show. And everybody's just pushing on each other. And it's this battle on the first day is kind of a mess like Shiloh was. So there was no real cohesive push or penetration by Bragg's army. Although Bragg does manage, they still manage to, by the end of the day, to push the Union back across the creek on the south side of Missionary Ridge. The good thing, though, that happens for the Union is now Rosecrans has got his 3 corps together. So he survives the day without, you know, one being gobbled up and demolished, and then him being outnumbered. So he's got his army put back together, and Bragg maintains the initiative. Longstreet arrives with 2 more brigades that evening of the 19th at 11 o'clock in the evening. He rides down here. He tries to find Bragg from the railhead at Ringgold in the dark. No clue where to go. They almost lost General Longstreet to capture that night because he was, they had enough horses. They brought some horses on the train for him and his staff, and they were, you know, going through Fountain Creek, and then they saw some soldiers, and it turns out that they were Union soldiers. They were pickets, and the pickets just greeted him. Hi, how are you guys doing? And Longstreet said, "Oh, do you know a way to cross here?" And the picket said, "Yeah, you can go further down here." And so he kind of backed out of that situation before they figured out who he was, and they didn't realize they were Confederates. So he got away. They almost lost him to capture that night. So then he finds Bragg. We've just gone down, start getting some sleep, and he wakes him up, and they have a meeting. Bragg gives him a map of the area and says, "I want you to take command of the left wing. I'm going to run the same option, the same plan as yesterday. We'll be in an N echelon starting on the right. Each one, the N echelon works like this: the most right unit starts. When he goes, the next one starts, the next one, the next one, the next one. So that's the signal for each of these. So that way it becomes like a hinge, like this. And they're going to continue to try and shove the Union down into this area where Bragg wanted them to go. But Bragg's army has problems that you don't really find in the Army of Northern Virginia. He's not got all of these procedures down. Excuse me, getting communications right to subordinates. And D.H. Hill doesn't get the word. It's not his fault. And so, when Bragg thinks the attacks are going to be going in at 7 o'clock in the morning, nothing's going on. The Confederates are just getting up, cooking breakfast and waiting for something to happen, get told what to do. And the Union used this time to do position improvement, which they do. And then Bragg goes over there to see General Polk, who's having breakfast on a table with a tablecloth and plates and everything. Why aren't the attacks going in, General? And well, I told him to. And Bragg, was pretty angry at that point. So he and his staff get down to the units themselves and start getting them cranked up. And the right wing starts attacking, later in the morning, around 10, I think, is most accounts. So Longstreet's over here thinking of what's going on. We should have started hearing this going off at 7 o'clock in the morning. Nothing happened. So he fashions he realizes the whole plan is miscarried. So he says, there's not going to be any echelon attack. I'm going to have to come up with something else. So what he does is he comes up with a column. It's going to, and what happens in, real quickly is it breaks through the Union line. He's going to turn to the right, and he's going to assault this way and try and get in behind the other wing and bag this whole army. These guys are all running for their lives. And Thomas is the hero on the Union side who stops, catches these running, panicking guys because he sees Snodgrass Hill as a good terrain feature to mount his defense on, and starts planting these units here. And the other hero on the Union side is Union General Granger, the Reserve Corps commander, who first sends a battery down to stiffen up Thomas and starts coming down this way as well to try and make and strengthen him. But Longstreet then realizes, okay, I'm trying to get through around Thomas to this fast go terrain and get on these passes in Missionary Ridge. If I can get them, we've bagged the whole army. And then maybe we can take this whole thing into captivity. And he might have been, it might have been right. So what does he do here that's modern? So that's decades in the future. This is the battlefield there, park. It's Battlefield Park. This is a little, I guess we can call this the Brotherton cabin, or his headquarters. That's there. There were more houses on the Brotherton property, but the Union picket line is over here in the woods behind the Brotherton cabin, and he wants to find some way to get through the woods because he knows there's fast go, flat, open terrain meadows on the other sides of the woods. And he finds out that there is a private, one of the Georgia regiments. There's a private, Tom Brotherton, who's right from this. This is his house. He's right from this area, so he knows this area like the back of his hands. Here's a good picture. This is Dan Patterson. He's a great grandson of General Longstreet. He's a friend of mine. He lives up in Northern Virginia. And this picture was taken in 1999. And this is the grandson of Private Tom Brotherton. So they linked up that year and took this picture together, which I think is pretty good. So so anyway, Brotherton, excuse me, tells General Longstreet, yes, sir, there is a cow trail that goes from our property. This is the Brotherton property here, this lawn here. And there's a trail that goes through the woods. And you can see there's an open area on the other side of the woods. So the woods here is not that deep. Now, of course, today it's a road. So Longstreet says, that's the thing I need. I need that as a terrain, as a control measure to line up the units on, and they're going to follow that through. Now, what I'm getting at here is, why is this forward thinking? In the First World War, in the Civil War, and all the wars between them, the First World War was plagued with this constant back and forth in no man's land. Everybody just going straight forward, no maneuver, and everybody just getting mowed down by machine gun fire on both sides. And they couldn't figure out for the life of them how to break out of this deadlock that was going on from the English Channel down to the Swiss border, killing generations for years, millions per year. It wasn't until the end of the war, the end of the last year of the war, that the German colonel started thinking about forget this and make narrow penetrations with massive power at a very narrow point, penetrate, and then you get into the rear areas, and there'll be much fewer, very few casualties, and you can cause all kinds of havoc on your opponent and then collapse the whole line that way. So that's the difference between, what they were thinking in World War I and what they were able to do by the time of the Second World War, improve upon it. So like this man here, Heinz Guderian, we consider him essentially the grandfather of offensive armored warfare, of tying all this together, which would be called AKA Blitzkrieg. That's not his term. That was, probably newspaper people, German or American or British newspaper people who called it that. But the idea was, as I showed you on the other one, was that he's the one who came up with the first tank divisions in the 1930s. And his idea was that you penetrate with massive strength, you outnumber your enemy, even though the enemy outnumbers your army overall. You get so much power in a local area that it's here, they just can't stop it. You can break through, but you don't fight these guys with your tank units. You use the engine of the tank, which he believed is no less and weapon and the gun, and then you drive into the rear areas and go after the headquarters, rip down the communications, go after the supply lines, and then all of these units, they lose situational awareness and the defense collapse. And that's one of the things about Blitzkrieg on the largest scale that was so successful for Germany early in the war. And other practitioners like Erich von Manstein and Field Marshal Rommel were good at this. And then later in the war, the Americans do this. Now at the point of breakthrough, oh, it's covered up, but the German word is Schwerpunkt, the point of the main attack, the point of the main effort, the where you're going to have your main strength. So it's kind of a two-sided meaning. Where you're going to point, where you're going to attack, what point of the enemy line, and then where you're going to put your main weight. It's going to go through, and you're not going to be all spread out. I'll show you that in a minute. You make it as narrow as you can. You turn it on its tail so that it's long and has lots of power. So Longstreet gets, after he's met with Bragg, he leaves Bragg about midnight on the 20th, comes over the other wing, and he sees he has four. There are these four Western divisions here: Preston, Hyman, Johnson, Stewart. The first guy, and Hood sitting behind him now with the five brigades from Virginia. So this is a division plus under Hood. And he goes to see this man, General Stewart. Stewart says, "Hey, General Longstreet, there's a vacant space between us and Polk's wing." And so Longstreet says, "Oh, all right, well, I want you to close that up." So everybody to the right. So Stewart moves over, Bushrod Johnson moves over, Hyman moves over, and Longstreet says, "Not you, Preston, I want you. You're going to be my reserve. You're going to come back here. You park next to Hood." Now, and he slides Hood over behind Johnson, Bushrod Johnson. These are Bushrod Johnson's 3 brigades of a provisional division. And then you got Hood with his 5 from Virginia. And this is 8 brigades in 5 echelons. And Longstreet says, "Hood, you're the command, you are now going to be the tactical commander of this, well, what we might call in World War II, the Schwerpunkt, or this attack column." So that's what he does here. Now, some odds was having this discussion at dinner, and Longstreet, a lot of people say that Longstreet's success at Chickamauga was a fluke. It was just luck, happenstance. He just, the troops were in motion, and then he just had to go with the deployments the way they were. That's not true. You look in the ORs, and all of these brigade commanders, I think except one of them, I think it's this fella, but all of these guys left us, except, of the 8, 7 of them, I think, left us records that tell us when they were ready. They all say, "Oh, we were here." These guys said, "Oh, we were all sitting here ready to go at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning." These two were back here around 7, and then they moved up here at 9. So, or 8. So they were all sitting here, but think about these guys, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, that's 1 hour, 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11. They're all sitting there ready to go for 4 hours. And all these things in the book say that, they were jockeying, moving. Longstreet was trying to jockey units around for 4 or 5 hours. No, they were sitting there ready to go. I mean, they could have sat there, and they probably sat on their, laid down and even got some sleep, or maybe tried to have some food. I don't know, but they were ready to go. And then, they're waiting for the en echelon thing to happen. It's still, before 11, nothing yet. Longstreet writes a note to General Bragg a little bit before 11, apparently. He says, "General Bragg, I have a column ready to go. I think I can rupture the enemy line, break the enemy line. If you care to have me send it in." This was just before 11, but he never got word back from Bragg. And then shortly after that, the division, Polk's most left division, starts attacking, and the word gets over to Stewart. So Stewart, starts firing on the enemy, and then Longstreet knows this, and he tells Hood, "Okay, launch, away you go." And then he sends in the attack column, and it goes. Now, we say in the military, you want to have to be relatively assured that you can break an enemy line. You want to have all things being equal again, no defensive works, or hiding in towns and rocks like devil's den or anything, but in terrain like this, where both sides have the same terrain situation, you know, you want the attacker to defender ratio. You want 3-to-1 odds to be reasonably assured of penetrating an enemy line. Now, Longstreet assumes there's going to be a Union division in front of us. Your typical division, like Bushrod Johnson's 3 brigades. This is Major General Wood. He's got 3 brigades too. So at their deepest, they might have 2 up and 1 back, so that the deepest, there'd be 2 brigades. So to get 3-to-1 or more, Longstreet, I think, plans 4-to-1 with his 8 against 2, because this is only a 400-yard wide attack, you know, distant length instead of this whole wide thing. It's very narrow. And then what happens that he doesn't know anything about is, you know, Rosecrans thinks there's a gap on the other side on the other wing. And so he tells Major General Wood, move over there and plug that gap. Well, there's no gap. Now he's creating one right over here, you know. And so as Major General Wood is moving out of the way, this last brigade is right over here when Longstreet launches Hood, and 8-to-1, you know, he gets steamrolled. So, you know, this is why I think this is a modern, you know, World War II style attack, if you want to call it that. The Schwerpunkt, as the Germans call it. And this is what they were doing so well. Some of these generals were doing so well in the Second World War. Look at this comment here by Field Marshal Rommel. This is after the Gazala line falls, and now he's got to go after the secondary line. Now, not all of his guys that he had over there were on top of this thinking either. He was also coaching, teaching, and mentoring some of his, you know, division commanders and brigade commanders. You know, he'd fly around in an airplane and see what the heck they're doing and land, and then he'd start, you get over here and you get people redirected and get after them. But look at this comment here. Many of these, he's talking about some of these guys. He's talking about this guy. This is the 5th Light German Division. He'd not mastered the art of concentrating his strength in one point, forcing a breakthrough. So that's the thinking that's evolving in the Second World War. Our guys start to do this a little later in the war. Like General Patton is probably the first one to really start to appreciate this. Now, I don't know if you know this, but you know, you watch these movies and these things about the D-Day landings, and you think, oh, all these guys went across, and then they fought their way onto the beaches and everything, and after that they just conquered France. But it wasn't that simple in the beginning. You know, in the beginning, after a month, you know, Patton is still not in the game yet. He's still over in England, being, you know, pretending to be this fictitious army commander that's opposite Calais to tie down the main German 15th Army over there, so it won't come in over here and oppose, you know, Eisenhower's landing. So it's part of the deception plan, which is good. I mean, that's pretty good what Eisenhower does there. But he criticizes Eisenhower after a month worth of this, because they're just going very slowly. You know, they can't even get Kahn in the British sector. The U.S. sector is going very slow. And the Germans are slow, you know, bringing in reinforcements as fast as they can, or even getting them in from Russia. You know, even 2 SS Corps come in from Russia. The Reserve Corps over there gets in France in time. And so he says, you know, here's his criticism. This is of Eisenhower trying to push all along the front, and they've got no power anywhere, as George Patton says. And I think he's right. Because once he starts getting into the game, he says to General Eisenhower, no, we're going to do something. What we should do, once you make the Third Army operational, we'll go swing around them where they're the weakest. They're the weakest out here by the coast, not here where the SS Panzer Corps have come in from Russia, those guys with the Tiger tanks that can blow holes in us, no problem. Let's go out here where the weakest. And once we get around them, then, you know, the whole thing will collapse. And he was right, you know. So that's the kind of thinking. So here at Chickamauga on this scale, there's the Brotherton cabin. I took this picture out in the area. That's the wood line that you saw from Brotherton. The 100th Illinois is are the pickets there. It's only 100. These guys are going to come out of the woods. They're covered by the woods. The whole Schwerpunkt come out of the woods. They only got to go 175 paces, which is pretty good. They'll be right on top of them. Compare that to what they had to do at Gettysburg. Look at that. Over a mile they've got to go. Out of the, there was woods here, but then they're all shoulder to shoulder on a wide 1 mile front. And there's really, like General Patton said, there's not the or General Field Marshal Rommel, or Guderian, it's not the point, But now this is still not a good idea because they're too exposed, and there's artillery's going to pound them all the way, of course. But like here, the Union they don't even have artillery over there, so they're just going to rush them, and they'll be right on top of them. Even if Major General Wood's division was all there completely, it wouldn't have stood a chance. Here's from the Union viewpoint, from the 100th Illinois. Here's Brotherton Cabin. So you just have the two brigades. They're only 450 yards wide. Bushrod Johnson is the lead of this thing, coming at them. And this is the it's a little washed out. This is a plaque that sits in front of the Brotherton Cabin, and it shows what it must have looked like to the Union from the Union perspective as these echelons were coming in. There's the first echelon. There's the second one behind it. There's the third one just coming out of the woods, and they don't even know there's two more behind that. So just imagine how scary that must have been for these guys. So just about done. So here's the Longstreet's column. I told you how he moved everything over. Here's how it looks like on the map. Punches through. Now he turns, as Bragg wanted everyone to go this way, I told you that plan had miscarried. So what he does is he changes from going left, he goes to the right, because I said he wants to get in behind the Union other wing and try and bag it and cut those escape routes at McFarland Gap and the other gap, Rossville Gap. That's his plan. He's not able to get Bragg to give him any reinforcements. Cheatham's division was really not employed at all to help him break Snodgrass Hill. But anyway, I still think that was a real good piece of work that he does there at Chickamauga, and it's definitely a modern style attack, or a German style Schwerpunkt of the Second World War. So